Welcome to The Democratic Voice, your community action program dedicated to bringing you the issues that impact America and concern Colorado. Brought to you every week at this time by the El Paso County Democratic Party, your voice in the future of Colorado Springs.
Good evening and welcome to The Democratic Voice. I'm Les Thompson, sitting in for Fred Hardy this week. Tonight we have with us Jared Polis, who sits on the Colorado State Board of Education. Within the last couple weeks, you should have received a report card on your school from Jared Polis. I encourage you to read through this, see how your school's done, fill out the response card, and send it back to Jared so he can see what your feelings on things are. Good evening, Jared, and welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jared?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I do look forward to receiving a lot of the cards back for feedback. I really rely on people calling and writing letters and filling out those cards to help get a feel for what people across the state are thinking. My background is in business. I founded and run several high-tech internet-related businesses, including an internet access provider, the greeting card website, bluemountain.com, and proflowers.com, which I am still on the board of and still involved with. In addition to that, I've been active in the community, and I decided to get more involved with education and ran for the State Board of Education in 2000. So I've been on there almost 2 years at this point. And it's been an interesting experience. I've learned a whole lot about education. There's a lot that we can do better and that we need to do better, and I'm really dedicated to help making some of those things happen.
Okay. When I talked with you earlier, you wanted to talk a little bit about House Resolution 1, the Leave No Child Behind federal legislation.
Yeah, this is a very important piece of educational reform that just came out of Washington a few months ago. This is really the largest change in federal policy in several decades. And what it does is it does some good things and some bad things and some in between, but it really changes many things here for how we operate in Colorado, and even more so in other states, because Colorado is pretty far along in the same direction as the Leave No Child Behind Act, which is standards-based education reform, standards and accountability, measuring the results of the students, which we do through the CSAP test here in Colorado. States that didn't have that developed, it actually required to develop standardized testing and standards in order to continue to receive federal funds. Colorado already had that done, and there's really some fine-tuning we have to do to be in compliance. But some of the more exciting elements of H.R. 1 is it does, really for the first time, the federal government is asking for concrete results about what its investments yield and what they provide. For a very long time, the federal government simply gave out the money to the school districts and required that it was spent in certain ways, but really didn't measure the results in any meaningful outcome-based way. And now with this new education reform bill, they're giving the local districts in the states more ability to decide where we need to spend the money here. Where El Paso County, District 11, District 50, District 2, where they want to spend the money to meet their particular needs. But in exchange for that, they have to demonstrate to the federal government that they are enhancing the education of the children through improving the results of the kids in the standardized test scores. Part of that sort of agreement with the federal government is that there's going to be more money flowing to our schools here in Colorado from the federal government to help implement some of the innovative new programs to help kids learn. There's some money earmarked for elementary school reading that will go to innovative programs similar to our Read to Achieve grant program, which we already have in Colorado, and which many schools here in El Paso County receive grants for. But now there's going to be a new set of federal grants that will also be coming to some of these schools to help establish innovative programs to help 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders learn to read and learn to read well. In addition, there's a lot of other things in there. For instance, for some of the schools that are left behind, and of course, part of the sort of traditional problem that I and a lot of fellow Democrats have with the Republicans' approach to education is they emphasize the penalty aspects of it too much. They try to penalize the schools that actually need the help the most. Some of the schools that serve underprivileged communities, some of the schools that serve primarily students of color, English language learners. These are schools that tend to come out in the bottom of the standardized test scores. And the Republican response is, let's blame the teachers there, let's blame the administrators, let's blame the people that are running that school. Now, that is really not really the correct answer. I mean, clearly there's socioeconomic factors that lead to that, and actually to help close the learning gap, we actually need to provide more resources into those schools and the types of know-how and resources to help those kids learn, because truly every child can learn. It really doesn't matter what type of background you come from, what your race is, you can learn. But there's a different set of challenges when you're coming to school hungry versus coming to school well-fed. There's a different set of challenges where you're going home to college-educated parents and you have that intellectual enrichment around the dinner table versus going home to two parents who didn't graduate high school. And those are different challenges that we need to acknowledge in the public schools. And through H.R. 1, there will be some funds available for the bottom-performing schools to help empower parents to choose supplemental programs to educate their child that can be run by the school or the district or the city or by private providers and nonprofit providers as well. Essentially, there'll be extra tutoring money available for kids that are at some of these bottom-performing schools. Now, I want to point out that this is a bipartisan education reform package. President Bush and Ted Kennedy worked very hard on it. Unfortunately, Joel Heffley and Representative Schaefer from Northern Colorado actually wound up voting against it. But that just sort of shows how much more radical they are than many of the national Republicans like President Bush and Representative Scott McGinnis who voted for it. And I think that this is really an exciting time. It's certainly not everything the Democrats would want or not everything the Republicans would want. I mean, there's many Republicans who want to abolish the Department of Education altogether today, including people like Joel Heffley and Bob Schaefer. But this was a compromise package where we got a lot of what we want, and I think it really will help over the next several years improve student achievement here in Colorado.
Well, good. Thank you, Jared. That's quite a bit of information on House Resolution 1. We know that the Colorado State Legislature just closed yesterday. You want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Colorado in education?
Sure. We at the State Board always are kind of happy when the state legislature leaves because they find sort of finished wreaking their havoc, and now we kind of have to clean up the pieces and get everything together for the schools in Colorado. They did pass a School Finance Act. There were many elements that went into this at the last minute, a lot of jockeying, a lot of horse trading. There was some talk for a while of vouchers being a part of that. Vouchers did not wind up being a part of what we're doing here in Colorado, which is consistent with what the voters of Colorado chose several times, not to go down that route. A few things that I was particularly interested in and had some role in was working for was allowing for increased online educational opportunities here in Colorado. Colorado operates within the state, several online schools that kids can enroll in to take supplemental courses, also being registered in their local high school, courses that might not be available at their local high school. Or they can also absolutely enroll in full-time. For instance, the Monte Vista Online Academy, you actually enroll in as a full-time student and take all your courses online. Maybe you're working a job during the day as a 15 or 16-year-old and you want to be able to take all your courses at night and your district doesn't really offer that kind of night school. You can actually do that online. It requires a lot of dedication. It's certainly not for everybody, but it does allow those kids to stay in the system instead of forcing them to drop out because they want to work a job. And what we got in the School Finance Act and out of the state legislature this term for online learning was several things. There was a flaw in the funding for online learning for students that was created several years back. Essentially, the only students that were entitled to online learning were students that had been enrolled in a public school in Colorado the prior year. So we had this very bizarre situation where kids that were moving to the state, as well as kids that were enrolled in private schools, as well as kids that were being homeschooled, could not take public school online courses. And this was sort of one of those things where nobody's really sure how it got in there originally a few years ago, and it was just sort of there. But the issue was, and as you know, there was a big budget crisis this year, of course, and primarily because, again, the Republicans squandered a lot of the money that came in during the good years by issuing tax credits to their various special interests that gave them campaign contributions. But in this particular cycle, we wanted to address this because there was a real problem, and there were people that wanted to take online programs that were at private school or homeschooled or had moved in from out of state, and we wanted to provide that opportunity. So we had to fight because it would cost the state money, because the more kids that are enrolled in that sort of thing, the more money has to go to education. And we got some slots, essentially, that limit the number of kids that can transfer from private or homeschooling into online education, but at least several hundred over the next few years will be able to do that. Of course, in addition to the kids who are already enrolled in public schools, who will have full access to the broad array of high school level online learning programs. Now, in addition to the high school level online learning programs, there's a number of terrific initiatives at the community college and higher education level in distance learning. Most of the institutions of higher learning in Colorado, and including through the community college system, offer some form of online learning, and that is a wonderful opportunity for high schoolers as well to take more advanced courses in areas that are of interest to them, particularly in some of the smaller communities and rural communities where you don't have a high school that offers very many AP courses or very many advanced courses or very many trade-related courses as well, and vocational education courses. Those are all sorts of things that you can get through the community college and the higher education system, and getting our high schoolers to have access to that has certainly been one of my priorities on the State Board of Education.
Okay. I know that you also champion technology here in Colorado. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We do. There's several initiatives that are pretty interesting and exciting with technology. One is that one thing that I've been championing, we still have a little bit of a ways to go with this, but we're working on it, is creating a standard for technology, creating grade level expectations for technology and information literacy that kids across the state should know. What should a Colorado third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader know about technology and information literacy? There are standards in other subject areas. There's over a dozen of them. There's math standards, there's social science standards, there's history standards, but we currently don't have them in technology and information literacy. And I think it would be of great value to the school districts and the schools and the students and the families if we can provide those expectations and make sure that kids by third or fourth grade across Colorado know how to use a graphical based interface on a computer. They have rudimentary typing skills, know how to operate a mouse. As they go to the upper levels, junior high, they're able to operate spreadsheets, word processing programs, etc. To set those minimum standards is something that's very important to ensure that no child is left behind. I also operate a nonprofit, the Jared Polis Foundation, and we're very active in the technology space as well. One of the main things we do is we refurbish old computers that are donated by corporations here in Colorado, and we put them into youth centers, boys and girls clubs, churches, community centers, those sorts of things. And we'd actually love to have more here in Colorado Springs and El Paso County. So if anybody is interested for your nonprofit organization to have some computers that would be open to the community, feel free to give my foundation a call. Our number is 303-415-9806. Also visit our website, www.jaredpolis.org. There's some feedback forms on there and a little bit more information about what you would need to do if you want to administer one of these programs that receives the free computers. The other thing that my foundation does is we've developed some technology curriculum that's geared towards 5th, 6th, 7th graders, and we have a mobile field trip, if you will, a school bus called the Education Station that is outfitted with all the latest gadgets, and it travels around the state. And we arrange this with schools. It pulls up to a school, and the kids come out in groups of 10 or 15, and it's a 1-hour course. It's tied into state standards that they take using the technology on the school bus. It's sort of a fun educational experience about computers and about technology that we've brought to over 3,000 Coloradans so far, including, of course, many here in El Paso County and southern Colorado. And that bus is continually on the road and is usually booked several months out. But that's the other major initiative that my foundation has on technology.
Thank you. Last week, I know you opened a cinema here in the Colorado Springs area. That's the only kind of it in the state. Is that correct, the Cinema Latina?
We have, there's actually two Cinema Latinos here in Colorado, one in Aurora, one in Colorado Springs. One of the exciting things about Colorado Springs and El Paso County has been the changing demographics over the last few decades. I was very excited, for instance, that I could get a good taco next door. I mean, that's something that you couldn't get in Colorado Springs, a decade or two ago. And I think that enriching the cultural heritage of not only Colorado Springs but all of Colorado is something that's very dynamic and exciting, and it's represented by increased cultural opportunities, including festivities around Cinco de Mayo, including Cinema Latino, certainly a part of that, and many other things that I think will lead to our enrichment and betterment as a city here and as a state.
Now, is a Cinema Latino, is that going to show the big blockbusters as they come out, or Is that a couple weeks behind?
Well, we're on time with most of them. We show, what we do is we're on North Academy, 911 North Academy, and we cater to primarily a Spanish-speaking audience, but certainly some English speakers are also interested in our movies, or people who are learning Spanish. And learning Spanish is a very important thing to do. It's one of the single best things you can do to boost your earning potential. Bilingual people earn something like 20% more for similar jobs than people who are monolingual, and there's just a whole plethora of opportunities. When companies are hiring, they make a deliberate effort to hire bilingual people because it's so important in today's economy, and that's what separates one person's resume from 20 others who are monolingual. Right. And I think that certainly a fun part of the learning experience, if you're trying to learn Spanish, could very well be going to the movies in Spanish. And what we do is we offer movies from Central America, from South America, as well as out of Hollywood, and those movies are frequently subtitled in Spanish, so you can sort of follow along in both languages.
Okay. And then just to kind of wrap it up here, we'll talk a little bit about, I know you're a champion, the Election Day voter registration drive. You want to tell us a little bit about that and what that's about?
Sure. This is something that I'm very passionate about, that we're going to be doing this election cycle, trying to get onto the ballot for this November. And we love your help, and I'll give the number again after I describe it a little bit, but our number is 303-333-VOTE, 303-333-VOTE. This initiative would allow people to register to vote on Election Day. And as you know, there's in the past and through time, there's been many impediments to preventing people from voting. There's been things like poll taxes, there's been things like literacy tests, things that have been deliberately designed to disenfranchise people. One of the last remnants of that survives to this day is the voter registration process, where even though you're an eligible elector and you have a constitutional right to vote, if you're not registered 30 days before the election, you're effectively disenfranchised. You can't show up to vote. And unlike most of you who watch this show and most people who are active in the Democratic Party, most people don't pay attention to politics day in and day out. And really, they start tuning in 2 or 3 weeks before an election. And by that point, unfortunately, it's actually too late to register to vote if you haven't already. We have a very mobile society. People move frequently. I think in an average 5-year period, something like 60 or 70% of the population of Colorado moves. And whenever you move, you have to re-register between elections, and frequently that's sort of at the bottom of the list of things that people want to do, and they realize that it's Election Day, and lo and behold, even though they're a eligible elector, they're unable to vote, and it's a very unfortunate thing, but it's something that's easy to fix. And so by passing Election Day voter registration in November, we can allow all people who are constitutionally eligible to vote to go to their own polling place and vote. They have to show a photo ID and so forth when they register, and they can just go ahead and cast their ballot there. We would love your help on this. What we need to do over the next month and a half is circulate petitions and get signatures to certify this for the ballot. We need 80-some thousand valid signatures, and to get that we need to gather about 120,000 signatures. And if you'd like to help circulate petitions in your neighborhood, give us a call at 303-333-VOTE, and we would love to get some petitions right out to you. We can also answer any questions that you might have about that. And when we do get it on the ballot, hopefully we can count on your support. We don't have a number yet. We can't say vote yes on amendment, 44 or 45 or whatever it is. We don't get that number until we turn into petitions, but you will be hearing about this campaign, and it's an electoral reform that I believe will really improve our democracy here in Colorado. 6 other states have it. They have a very good track record. Those states have 8 to 10% higher voter participation than states that don't have it, and I think it would be very healthy for our democracy if we can follow that lead and do that here in Colorado.
Okay. Once again, I'd like to encourage you to read through your Jared Polis education report. There's a lot of good information here. It covers the information that's on your local schools. There is a reader response card. Please fill that out and return it to the Jared Polis Foundation.
I'll give our website address again,
okay.
www.jaredpolis, JAREDPOLIS.com. And we have a whole lot of information on there as well about education, about the foundation, and about ways that you can contact us if you have any questions or comments or ideas about what you think we ought to be doing for education in your community.
Okay. Before we close here, I'd like to take the time and talk about some of the candidates. This year we have for U.S. Senate, Tom Strickland. Running for governor, Raleigh Heath. Here in the El Paso County area, We have Tony Marino running for Colorado Senate, Senate District 11. Mike Merrifield, who's running for House District 18. P.M. Wynn for House District 17. Ken Barella for House District 19. And Dean Tollefson for County Commissioner District 5.
Now, these are some incredibly important races, and it's really important who controls the state legislature. And
right.
People like Tony Marino and Mike Merrifield, we really need them in Denver because, you know, at this point, all of El Paso County's delegation is Republican. And that's not only bad for the state, it's also bad for El Paso County because El Paso County needs to have representation on both sides of the aisle. And that helps in terms of concerns that El Paso County has. So it's very important not only for the state and certainly for education, but also for El Paso County to send some of those fine candidates that we have to Denver.
Right, and Tony Marino is one of those fine candidates that we will be sending here in the fall. Not going to send, we are going to, Tony Marino will be going to represent us. Like you talked about in the beginning, the bipartisanship of the House Resolution number 1. It's important to have that balance, even at the state level.
Tell me, who do you have running against Schulteis down here?
Oh, that would be Mike Merrifield.
Is that the district? Schulteis introduces a bill every year to get rid of me. I don't know if any of you have been following that or if the Gazette covers that, but last year and this year he introduces a bill to remove my office while I'm in it. And this year it actually made it out of the House and they killed it in the Senate, but it was kind of an interesting thing. But what I figure is I know I must be doing something right if he's coming after me.
Well, hopefully we can replace him. We can give him his pink slip. But I'd like to encourage everybody, once again, read the Jared Polis report, fill out your reader response cards. The El Paso County Democratic Party can use a lot of help. There are several ways to volunteer. If you'd like to get involved with that, the phone number is 473-8713, or you can also visit us online at www.peakdems.org, peakdems.org. Thank you.
Because at the end of the day, folks, this is not about some abstract government plan. This is about human beings. This is about saving people's lives, and it's about improving people's quality of life. So we want to relate the things that we're fighting for to human beings. And so here today, we're thrilled to have Ms. Beverly Aronson. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. In regard to medication, I have had 15 surgeries. I take 5 prescriptions. I should take 6. One, it takes 1/2 of my Social Security to pay for my prescriptions per month. There is another prescription I should take. I've had a 3 bypass. I should take Lipitor. If I took Lipitor, there would be absolutely nothing left to carry on in a month. I hope that Mr. Strickland is able to do something for us. I am blessed, however, with a daughter who lets me live in a home and a friend who we share expenses. So that helps me. Thank you.
Thank you. What we're calling today for Congress to pass is really a 3-part plan. First of all, we're calling on Congress to pass immediately a meaningful prescription drug benefit that would be universal, available to every Medicare recipient, voluntary, so that people that already have other coverage could opt in or out depending on what's best for them, and affordable, that would be meaningful, so it would help people like Ms. Aronson from her first dollar of cost. As you can see from the statistics that we're going to talk about in a moment, seniors in Colorado and citizens in Colorado and in this country pay the highest cost for prescription drugs of any people in the world. That is unacceptable. So part 2 of what we're calling for here today is to require that drug companies sell their medications to pharmacies serving Medicare patients at the average price that drugs are sold in other developed countries. Now let me take a moment and tell you that we did a pretty comprehensive comparison of drug prices in Colorado for these 5 very commonly prescribed drugs. We compared the average Colorado price by looking at pharmacies around Colorado. We compared it with the Canadian prices for these drugs, and then we came up with an average foreign price, and then the differences. And you can just look at how dramatic it is, the cost differential for what Coloradans have to pay compared to residents of every other country in the world. Just look at Prilosec for a minute, which is a very popular and very effective ulcer and antacid type medication. Average Colorado price $128 a month. The Canadian price $53, the average foreign price $54. So 133% difference. And you can just go down the line and see the differences. And this is replicated in many, many other situations. What we're proposing is a cost containment strategy. There is legislation that has been introduced, which we believe ought to be passed immediately, that would require that if drug companies want to sell their drugs to Medicare recipients, that Medicare recipients be able to really get together and as a group have group purchasing power, and that the government would be able to negotiate with these drug companies to get the average foreign price. If the drug companies didn't want to sell to Medicare patients, they wouldn't have to. But if they did want to sell to them, they would have to give the average price that they provide in other foreign countries. We believe that would make as much as a 40% difference in the cost of drugs on a monthly basis. So for someone like Ms. Aronson, she could save 40% right off the top in terms of what her drug costs are in a monthly benefit. When you add that to a prescription drug benefit under Medicare, which is what we're calling for the government to adopt at this point, the government would also save. The cost of providing that benefit could be reduced by up to 40%. So it's an important strategy in terms of making this overall plan affordable. It would also affect individuals in terms of the share of their prescription drug costs they would continue to be faced with even after a Medicare prescription drug benefit was put in place. Now the third part of this plan gets at another part of the equation, and that's the availability of generic drugs. Now, we all know that generic drugs are a whole lot less expensive than their patented companion drugs. And we have done a comparison of the prescriptions for generic drugs and prescriptions for brand name drugs and the cost differential for comparable drugs, and the rate of increase in the cost of generic drugs versus other prescription drugs. And you can see it's a dramatic difference. Now we know that once a patent expires on a patented drug and a generic drug can be introduced, the price of that generic drug is significantly lower than the cost of the patented drug. But obviously, the system that we have today allows for delays in litigation and regulatory approvals, so that sometimes it takes years after a patent expires for a competitive generic drug to get on the market. So the third part of our proposal here today is to cut through this red tape, cut through this bureaucracy, cut through this litigation environment we have now, and pass legislation that would streamline the approval process for generic drugs so that we could get competitively priced generic drugs onto the market faster, saving American consumers, including senior citizens, millions and millions of dollars.